good morning. Thank you, Kevin and Teresa. Thank you, worship team, for leading us in music today. I'm Alex Peretny, lead pastor here, and I want to greet you as well with the greetings you've already received, the Christmas season greetings. It's an exciting time of the year for us as just individuals and as a church family to be able to be celebrating this time of the year. And during this month, we're doing a little different sermon series than we normally do. We've just finished going through, verse by verse, section by section through a book like Matthew's Gospel. And this December, we're doing something a little different, a little more topical, a little more devotional. We're calling it the hymns of Christmas. And in a sense, what we're doing is we're going to be digging into a hymn that we often sing around the Christmas time and retelling the great story of Jesus' birth through some of the words and some of the themes of a hymn. And it's a little different, but I think it's something that will, help us get into the spirit and the celebration of Christmas. And today we're going to be preparing ourselves to sing after communion, O come, Immanuel. How many have heard of that Christmas hymn before and like it? Keep your hand up if you like it too. All right, so there's good. Yeah, good. Well, it's one of the oldest songs really that is around. In fact, some would say that it comes from the Middle Ages around the year 800 AD. How many of you were here at 800 AD? All right, a couple of you feel that way some days. And it was an antiphon or an anthem that was restructured. There are a number of different verses and formats, but it was restructured in the 1100s and was eventually published in Latin, and then it was finally put into English in like 1851. And I say that all to say that some of the songs and some of the things that we see have a rich history, have many different people of God that have touched it, that have shaped it, that have formed something like this. And so it's good for us sometimes to think, I might have been, born yesterday, but, like Christmas is something that people have been thinking about for a lot more years before me. And God's people have been reflecting and thinking and praying about all of this, and there's some rich history that we have when we think of some of these songs and some of these carols that we sing. And I've been listening to this song in all different versions this week. Some of the more traditional, O come, Immanuel. And even this week, I got to listen to the latest version of O come, Immanuel by Skillet, a Christian heavy metal band. And it was really cool to see how they start with this great minor tone, the seriousness, and they're singing. It begins in a hospital room because it begins with this sense of reflection and somberness. And so the singer is in a hospital room singing about Immanuel, and then they're in a church. And then they have to throw in the guitar, the great booming heavy metal thing. And some people got upset. Like, how could you take a song that's thousands of years old and put heavy metal in it? And oh, come on. And if that's your feeling, that's fine. I respect your opinion, but I was getting into it. It was neat. It was neat to see different. I'm a child of the 80s, and I grew up on all right. So, but what I'm trying to say is by listening to it in different versions this week, it's been really like flowing through my mind. And the words are jumping out in new ways. And so I want to think about the words of the song, yes, but I want to think about the scriptural basis for this and then its present application for us. And I hope that as we go through this, we'll reflect that even in dark days, God's people can rejoice as we anticipate the coming of Immanuel, God with us. Let's say that. Immanuel, God with us. And we can not only celebrate His birth by looking back, but we can also long for His return, which is still in the future. See, we uniquely live in a time frame where we can look back and see what God has done, but we can also anticipate what Immanuel, God with us, will be like even in the future. Now, this Christmas hymn helps us to rejoice. The key word is rejoice in the chorus. Rejoice even in the dark days. And some of the song, which is actually, now I'm going to sound like I know something about music, but I don't. But here's what I've been told. It's written in a minor key, right? Babette, is that right? Did I get that right off the internet? Google was right. Now, you're supposed to say, oh, that's really profound, Alex. It's written in a minor key. What does that mean? I'm like, I don't really know. But what I'm told is that it reflects the somber mood, if you will. But I can read, and so I read some of the words that have a somber mood to it. And so as you can follow along with the words that are on the back of the sermon outline, you can imagine that somber minor key, there you go, last time I'm going to say it, minor key way in which this song is kind of flowing. O come, Immanuel, and ransom captive Israel that mourns in lonely exile. You hear the word captivity. You hear the word exile. You think of the history of Israel and the ways in which they were often held against their will and often in places they didn't want to be. And if you go back far enough, you can think about how our first parents, Adam and Eve, were exiled from the garden. And God's people have been living in exile and separation. And it goes on to describe in the next verse, in verse 2, disperse the gloomy clouds of night. And it talks about death's dark shadow. Some really serious themes as God's people have reflected over the years about their own history and the history of God's people. They know that some people have lived in very difficult, trying times. And this song is written to those who may feel that way even today. The verses also remind us of the reason why we sometimes face this and feel this. For instance, the verse in one of the alternative verses that we won't sing today, but it says, O come, O branch of Jesse's stem, free thine own from Satan's tyranny. We live in a world where because of the fall, we live in the tyranny, we live in the rule and reign of the evil one. Even though Christ has come, Satan is still at work in our world. And it speaks about how we can even be freed from the depths of hell and the grave, a place of death, the death's abode. And so these words speak to us about a time and a place where people are saying, I feel the weight of life and circumstances. And so this hymn is written in this minor theme and key, and yet we're called to rejoice. And it reminds us of the first Christmas when Zechariah, who was the father of John the Baptist, and the story of the birth of John the Baptist is recorded for us alongside the story of the birth of Jesus because they go together. The forerunner, John the Baptist, is before Jesus, and it tells the story of how John the Baptist's birth came about. And when his father Zechariah was loosed literally to speak, he spoke these words to reflect that kind of mood of God's people for thousands of years who had struggled under the weight of tyranny, who had struggled under the weight of captivity, who had struggled, in a sense, at the door of death. And he says in Luke chapter 1, praise be to the God, to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come to his people. He has come to his people and redeemed them. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he said through his holy prophets long ago, salvation from our enemies and from the hands of all who hate us, to show mercy to our ancestors and to remember his holy covenant, the oath he swore to our father Abraham. And then notice what he says, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies. People of the Old Testament were waiting for that rescue. And as we think about this song, it reminds us of the thousands of years of captivity, of exile, of people feeling hopeless and helpless, and yet saying somehow, I know God has promised. I know God has promised. We can put ourselves in that moment and in that memory to understand the significance of what God did in sending Jesus after all those years of waiting. See, the truth of the matter is, as Christians today, that's you, that's me. If you're a believer in Jesus, right? You are doing two things, I hope, in this Christmas season. You are looking back at what has happened when Jesus came, was born as a baby. When he came to earth, the eternal Son of God took on human flesh. We're looking back at his first coming. But we're also looking ahead. We, like the Old Testament people, are still longing for him to return. We're longing for him, the King of Kings, to make all things right. We're still living with a sense of expectation and longing. And so we have this sense in which we look this way and remember what God has done, but we also look this way and say, oh God, there's still things for you to do. And so that's why as a church, and many churches follow this practice, we do something called Advent. Now, we don't make a big deal about it in the sense of we don't have an Advent wreath. Some churches have it, and that's great and good, and we don't necessarily do it exactly the way some of you may have grown up, but we try and focus in December on preparing our hearts to celebrate the nativity, the birth of Jesus. Why? Because if we don't take the time to prepare ourselves, the world around us will squeeze out the hurriedness of life, the activity and the buzz of the season will cause us to forget the real reason for the season. And so we take time in these 4 Sundays before Christmas to really refocus our hearts on the reason and the meaning for Christmas and the fact that Jesus has come and that his birth is an established fact of history. And so we take time as Christians to look back, maybe even remembering how the saints of old, those Old Testament figures, have waited and longed for Jesus to come. We think of those as we read the stories of those who held Jesus and saw Jesus for the first time. And in our mind's eye, through faith, we go back and we receive Christ in that same way that those in the first century did. But we're also people of the last days. We're people that live between the first coming and the second coming of Jesus. And everyone who has lived in this age for the last 2,000 years has lived in the last days. Do you know the last days were announced the minute Jesus went up to heaven? The minute he ascended to heaven, the last days began, because that means that he could come back again at any time. We live with this expectant hope that he will come back. And so while we're looking back at Jesus and receiving him as if he came the first time, as if we receive him as a baby for our own for the first time, we also look back to the one who will come back and return and establish his kingdom on the earth forever. And so we're in this in-between time as we're preparing for Jesus. And that's what Advent is about, allowing our hearts to get tuned to the real meaning of the season. And I hope that's something that you can do through the songs and through the worship and through your fellowship, and yes, even through the parties and the festivities and the celebrations. But I also recognize, especially with a song like O Come, Immanuel, that in some ways it touches some of us in different ways. And there's a group of people here today, perhaps, and listening online or will listen at some point, who could speak about their experience as navigating the holiday blues. While those around us are festive and excited and enthused and can't wait for eggnog and for all of the gifts and all the carols and everything, there are some of us who, although we're going through the motions, are also navigating the blues. And the somber tone of O come, Immanuel speaks to us in some different ways because we're feeling some of that sadness and gloom. Maybe because we've lost a loved one and the holidays remind us of that. Maybe because we're dealing with lack of resources, and maybe we're dealing with difficult circumstances in our lives. And we want to believe that God is for us, but we sometimes don't always feel that. This is a hymn that reminds us to still call upon the one who is coming. You see, to all these people, to all the people throughout all ages, and all of us here today in various circumstances of life, this Christmas hymn invites us to do one thing, to anticipate the coming of Immanuel by celebrating his birth and longing for his return. And what are we told to do? What are we instructed to do in the chorus? Rejoice! Rejoice! Immanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. What does it mean to rejoice? Well, it means to have joy, right? To rejoice. What does it mean to have joy? And how is joy different than our everyday experience in life? Well, happiness, our feeling of happiness is often based on our circumstances, on our happenstances. And we can actually acknowledge that right now my happenstances and circumstances are not what I want them to be. They're not the best. They're not optimal. In that sense, you can kind of say, I'm not that happy right now with things going on in my life. And maybe some of you are there and can say that. Others of you can say, no, it's never been better. And I rejoice with you, either those that are feeling a lack or those who are saying it's the best ever. But I'm not talking about happiness. This hymn is not talking about happiness. In the midst of this somber minor singing and key and all of that, when we get to the chorus, it's like we're calling ourselves to say, in the midst of it, rejoice, rejoice. And what does that mean? It means to put our confidence and our focus in the one who can give us the ultimate satisfaction. Give us the ultimate confidence that he's at work in our circumstances. To put our eyes on him and not on our circumstances. To rejoice. Matthew chapter 2 in verses 10 and 11 speaks about the Magi, the wise men from the east who came, the very first foreigners who came to worship Jesus in Jerusalem. And it says, after they were directed through Herod, that sinister guy, maybe you know the story, trying to trick them, and they finally got to find Jesus after following his star. And that's a whole other story for another day. But when they finally got to Jesus, who at that time may have been a young child, it says, when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. They had joy upon joy. Their joy was multiplied. It's kind of like hyper joy. It's kind of like sometimes those of us that aren't much, like, all right, I'm joyful, but I'm not that joyful. Like, I'm not going to raise my hand during the songs when I hear the word joy. No, like maybe you're, but that's kind of what we do here at Living Faith. We're kind of like overjoyed. It's kind of like we call attention to the joy and emphasize it and make it a little more special, like overjoyed, right? Raising our hands. We're kind of focusing ourselves, forcing ourselves, allowing the joy to overflow. Well, that's what the Magi did. But I want you to notice their joy led them to something significant that can help us all experience joy in this season. It says, when they saw the child and his mother Mary, they bowed down and worshiped him. The only way we can truly experience the radical joy that God wants for us this Christmas season is to take the focus off of everything around us and remind ourselves of the baby in the manger and bow down and worship the God of the universe, the Creator, who would become the created for us. To worship him, to bow down in reverence to him. You see, the song reminds us that we're worshiping none other than Immanuel. Immanuel, God with us. The Bible promised, the Old Testament prophet Isaiah promised there would come a time where a virgin would conceive and give birth to a son, and they would call his name Immanuel, which means God with us. And when we take the time to rejoice and focus ourselves on the one who was born, we recognize the one who was born is none other than the eternal one of the universe, the Son of God, wisdom from on high, the great Lord of might, these other terms that are describing Jesus in the hymn, none other than this person who took on human flesh and became a human being in the form of a baby. God did that for us, fulfilling thousands of years of prophecies, but coming into human flesh and entering into the human drama and history. If you know more about the story, you know he exchanged his throne for a stone manger. He humbled himself. Pastor Kevin will be speaking next week about thou didst leave thy throne, right? Thou didst. Another oldie, but goodie. Jesus came down. And so we focus our minds on this one who would come down, Immanuel, God with us, the great Lord. We're reminded he's also the branch of Jesse's stem. That means that he is the offshoot of Jesse, who is David's father. He's in the line of David. He's in the line of the kings. He's in the line of David. And that's a promise of fulfillment of promise of thousands of years of God saying the one who would come will be the son of David. He'll be the key of David. He'll be the one who is the final king of David. Scriptures emphasize that he was born in the city of David. We see that in the song as well. And we realize that in the end, as he's described in the song, he is the bright and morning star. He is the star that rises and outshines them all the kings of the universe, dim in response to his brightness, because he is ultimately the King of nations. Do you remember when the Magi came and they were coming to pay homage to Jesus, the baby? They said, "Who is this one who has been born King of the Jews? We've come to worship him." He was the promised King of the Jews, but the Bible also says, still in the future, as we look ahead to the future, we see that there is one who's riding a white horse, and it says about him that he is the King of kings. He comes as a baby in a manger, in a stone manger he lays, and he's called the King. When he comes back the next time, he is reigning and ruling, coming from heaven to bring heaven's reign to earth, and he is that King of kings. So we worship this God who humbled himself, but who is himself the King of kings and Lord of lords. So as we get ready to sing this song, I hope that this little excursion through the song has helped you to maybe think about ways in which you can put this song into your own reflection and practice. Maybe you'll take some look at some songs, renditions of it on the internet this week, and maybe even check out the Skillet song if you're a child of the 80s, and think a little bit about the way in which O Come, Emmanuel can draw our hearts toward the true meaning of the season. So I hope in this little devotional excursion, if you will, that you've learned that even in dark days, and maybe you're facing them today, God's people can still rejoice. We can rejoice. Why? Because we're anticipating not only the coming of Immanuel, God with us, and remembering it and celebrating his birth again as if it was for the first time, but we're also anticipating and longing for his return this season.